Rabbi's room today.
Yeah.
It's a busy day.
Good morning. Good morning. We begin on this very late morning by thanking our sponsors. We thank the sponsors for the Talmud Torah, for all the shiurim and all the drashas of the month of Elul. Jerry and Sarah Walaski in the schos for a refuah shlema for Zechariah Dov ben Parol Shira. May he be zocha to a refuah shlema ben Mehera Bekarov. We also thank the Tilson and Wolf families of Eretz Yisrael and other devoted Talmidim of our very special Rav who were unable to attend the weddings and who would like to wish the Rav a very special mazel tov on all the beautiful simchas in the family. We thank Shani and Avram Kalman for sponsoring the shiurim in memory of their beloved parents and in the schos of all those who need refuah shlema. And we thank Salma Wolf for sponsoring the shiurim with immense gratitude to Hashem and with tefillas for health for all in the new year. Today's daf is Kiddushin daf chaf beis. So we are going to begin Kiddushin chaf beis 22, 6 lines in with the words Tanu Rabbanan. We are, just a quick reminder, what are we discussing over here? We are in the very last piece of discussing Eved Ivri, and the Eved Ivri, after we figured out how one can acquire an Eved Ivri, how long an Eved Ivri stays, now we are up to the post-term of the Eved Ivri. He was there for his full 6 years, and now he'd like to stay on for a little bit longer. What's the halacha? He has to have his ear pierced by the door. The Gemara is going to spend time talking about that. There is actually a Tosfos on this page, on Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, Shlo Yichal Tzanav V'Cham, which is on yesterday's Gemara, which I actually would have liked to learn yesterday, but I think like 57 minutes in, I think I had exhausted my ability of learning this Tosfos with you. So if we can get through today's Amud in a fairly quick amount of time, we'll go back to this Tosfos, because this Tosfos is actually a very important Tosfos to learn. I think it's also a very important Tosfos for this time of year, as we are doing some self-introspection, some teshuvah. This Tosfos has a lot of very good yisodis in it that might be applicable. So, Mr. Hashem, at the end of this year, if we have time, we'll go back to it. But the Gemara writes the following: Tanu Rabbanan in Amar Yomar. So just let's if you have the Gemara that has the psukim on the side, it's worthwhile just looking at these psukim, because we are now focusing on what has to happen if an Eved Ivri would like to stay past his 6 years. So the psukim write, V'haya ki yomar elecha. Sorry, the first one before that. V'im amar yomar ha'eved. So the pasuk says, if say shall he say, the Eved, and it's important to recognize the Gemara says amar twice. V'im amar yomar ha'eved, ahavti es adoni. I love my master, as ishti, my wife, v'es banai, and my sons, lo eitzei chavshei, I do not want to go out free. That is the first pasuk where he makes the declaration about why he wants to stay. I like my master, I like my wife, I like my sons, I like my children, and therefore I would like to stay, and therefore I do not want to go free. And the pasuk continues. It's actually in another place, but it says, "V'haya ki yomar elecha lo eitzei me'imach," and it will be, if he says to you, I will not go out from within you, ki ahevcha, because I love you, ves beischa, and I love your, literally it means your house, but in this case your household, your wife, your family, ki tov lo imach, because it is good for him with you. These are the psukim which describe what an Eved will say when he wants to stay past the 6 years. So the Gemara is going to analyze these psukim and teach us all the halachos that are relevant and need to be known in order for an Eved to stay as an Eved Ivri Nirtza. Tanu Rabbanan, in Amar Yomar, it says Amar twice. Amar Yomar, there's redundancy in the pasuk. Ad Yomar v'yishana, he has to say it and say it again. So what does that mean? Amar betchilas sheish, if he says it at the beginning of the 6 years, that he wants to stay longer than 6 years. V'lo amar besof sheish, he doesn't repeat himself again at the end of the 6 years. Eino nirtza, he does not get the piercing, and he can't stay longer. Shenemar, for it says, lo eitzei chafshi, he has to actually say, I'm not going out free, which is ad sheyomer b'shas yitzia, until he actually says it at the time that he is leaving. Amar b'sof sheish, what if he just makes this declaration at the end of the 6 years? V'lo amar b'tchilas sheish, he doesn't make the declaration at the beginning of the 6 years. At this point in the Gemara seems to be understanding that he has to make the declaration all the way at the beginning of his term as an Eved Ivri, that he wants to stay longer. The halacha is, Eino nirtza, he's not going to have his ear pierced. Shenamar, for it says, Im amar yomar ha'eved. He has to make this declaration as an Eved. However, if he says it at the end, he's not an Eved anymore. The Gemara explains, Achi yomar kshu Eved, he has to actually say it while he still has the status as an Eved. So amar mar, Omar betchila sheish, if he says it at the beginning of the 6 years, v'lo Omar besof sheish, he does not say it at the end of the 6 years. Eino nirtzeh, does not get pierced. Shenemar, for it says lo eitzeh chafshi, because he has to make the declaration that I do not want to go free. So my irim lo eitzeh chafshi, why do you have to use the pasuk of lo eitzeh chafshi to tell you that he has to make this declaration at the end of the 6 years? Tepuklei, we can know this, we would be able to learn this halacha from the fact, what is the declaration that has to be made? He has to say, I love my master, my wife, and my children. Vileka, at the beginning of the 6 years, he doesn't have a wife and children yet. He just showed up. He can't possibly have married a Shifcha Kananis and had children already. So how is it possible that he can make this declaration of Ahavti, es Adoni, es Ishti, ves Banai, if he does not make the declaration at the end of the 6-year term? And we learned yesterday, in yesterday's Gemara, that this statement, this declaration that he makes, is li'ikuva. And that's how we knew that a Kohen indeed would be able to marry a Shivcha Kananis. So therefore, the Gemara says, why do you have to have the pasuk of Lo Eitzei Chashi to teach me that the declaration needs to be made at the end of the 6 years, and it's not sufficient if he makes the declaration at the beginning? That's obvious. He Es Adoni Es Ishti Ves Banai. And if that would happen at the beginning, Veleka, he wouldn't have that. Visu, and furthermore, Amar Besof Sheish, if he says it at the end of the 6 years, below Amar Betchila Sheish, he did not say that at the beginning of the 6 years, Eino Nirtza, he would not become an Eved Ivri Nirtza who has his ear pierced, Shenemar Ha Eved, because he has to be actually the Eved. Hold on a second. Atu Sof Sheish Lav Eved who? Is he not an Eved at the end? In other words, why does he have to make the declaration all the way at the beginning in order to be considered an Eved? He's an Eved all the way up till the end. He's considered an Eved. So who needs the declaration at the beginning? So Amar Rava explains, Betchilas, we'll read the parentheses just because it makes it a little easier to read. My Betchilas Sheish, what is Tchilas Sheish? So we understood that meant at the beginning of the 6 years. No, it means Betchilas Pruta Achrona, at the beginning of the last pruta of his work. Umay besof sheish. What does it mean when we say he has to make the declaration at the end of the 6? It doesn't mean at the end of the 6 years as opposed to the beginning of the 6 years. Rather, it means besof pruta achrona. Now, there's actually quite a long Rashi on this. So just to summarize it, what Rashi tells us is, and this actually gives a lot of it sheds light on all the other times when we said that an Eved has to do something while they're still able to do a pruta worth of work. What Rashi explains is we are going to always prorate the amount that he's paid to do his work, and when we get to that last pruta worth of work, that means the amount that he was purchased for is prorated over the 6 years of his work. Now, when we get to the last pruta of that calculation, that is when he's considered to still be an Eved. Why? Because he has a pruta still of the sale that was made to purchase him as an Eved. So, when he gets to that last pruta, before he works that last pruta worth, he needs to make the declaration of Ahavti es Adoni es Ishti es Banai, and then he has to say Lo Eitzei Chafshi before that last pruta expires. And what does it mean when we say B'tsof Sheish? That is at the end of that pruta when that last pruta is going to expire. The Gemara continues. Tan Rabbanan. Our Rabbanim have taught us, lo, when it says in the pasuk, isha ubanim, what happens if it's lo? Lo isha banim, he himself has a wife and children. Ularabo ain't isha banim. So he married a shivcha kananis, and he had children with that shivcha kananis, but his master does not have a wife and children. What's the halacha? Eino nirtza, he cannot become an eved ivri nirtza. Why? Shenemar, for it says in the pasuk, ki ahevecha, because I love you. That's beisecha. And Beisecha doesn't mean your physical home. It refers to his wife. Beisozu ishto, as the Mishnah Maseches Yuma tells us. So if the master doesn't have a wife, he can't complete the sentence of Ves Beisecha, and therefore he would not qualify to be an Eved Ivri Nirtza. L'rabo ishu banim. What happens if his master has a wife and children? Below ein ishu banim, he did not marry a shivcha kananis. He doesn't have any children. Eino nirtza does not qualify to become an Eved Ivri Nirtza. Why? Shnemar ahavti es adoni es ishti es banai. He has to be able to make that declaration. If he can't make the declaration because he doesn't have a wife and children, then it would not be relevant. Who oheves rabo? He loves his master. Rabo eino ohavo. His master does not like him. Sometimes those kinds of things happen. What's the halacha? Eino nirtza does not qualify to be an eved ivri nirtza. Why? Shnemar, for it says in the pasuk, kitov lo imach. It's good for him with you. But if it's not a two-way street here, the imach, the with you qualification is going to be missing, and therefore he will not be able to be an eved ivri nirtza. Rabo ohavo, what happens if his master loves him? Vu eno ohev es rabo. He doesn't like his master. I think that's probably more common. The halacha is, eno nirtza, he does not become an eved ivri nirtza, even if he wants to, shenemar ki ahevecha, because I love you. If he can't actually meet that qualification, the criteria of ahevecha, he can't become an eved ivri nirtza. Hu chola v'rabo eno chola. What if he's ill and his master is not ill? Eno nirtza. He cannot become an eved ivri nirtza. Shenemar, for it says in the pasuk, ki tov lo imach. It has to be good for him together. So if he's sick and his master is not, there's a part of this equity that's missing over here. Rabo chola, if his master is ill, v'hu eino chola, and he's healthy, eino nirtza, he cannot become an eved ivri nirtza. Shenemar, for it says in the pasuk imach, the same word tells that they have to be equal. Then now Rabbi bar Abaye has a question. Ba'a Rabbi bar Abaye, what would be the halacha of shneim cholim? They're both ill, so it's like an imo hanochi batzara. They're both suffering over here. Would we say, Mai, imach be'inan, do we need that they're both together? They're in this one together, and therefore it will work. V'ha'ika, they're both ill. O dilma, or maybe perhaps ki tov lo imach be'inan. It has to be good together. What's the Gemara? Was the answer of the halakha in this case? They're not enjoying this together. Teiku, the Gemara does not have an answer. What would be the halacha if they're both ill? Now, in terms of what type of illness has to be diagnosed in this case, it's not clear in the Gemara, but it seems very clear that it has to be a significant illness that affects their ability to be able to function properly. Tan Rabbana, the Gemara goes on and continues. Kitov lo imach. The pasuk tells us that it was good for him with you. Imach b'macha. We learned this Gemara on Shabbos. That means he has to be together with you with food. Imach b'mishta, he has to be together with you with drink. What does that mean? That there should not be a circumstance where you, the master, are eating clean bread, and he gets the dirty bread, or the inferior quality bread, or the leftover bread. Or ata shosa yayin yashan, you drink aged wine, v'hu shosa yayin chadash, and he drinks poor quality wine. Ata yashan lagabe muchen, you sleep on top of comfortable pillows and blankets and a mattress. V'hu yashan lagabe teven, and he's just sleeping on a bunch of straw. Mikan amru. From here we learned, kol akona eved ivri, anybody who purchases in eved ivri, kikona adon liatzmo, it's as if he purchased a master for himself. We spent time on Shabbos talking about what this means and the extent to which this goes, that a person needs to make sure that he is not going to be treating his eved in a way that is less than he is treating himself. Tan Rabbanan, we learned, v'yatza He will leave from within you, him and his sons with him. So Amr Shimon analyzes this. Imhu nimkar, banavu benosav minim karim. The Gemara is just wondering, what does this mean? That when he leaves, he takes his children and his sons and daughters with him. What does this mean? Let's just analyze this. If we're talking about the Shifcha Kananis and her children, that's not true. The Shifcha Kananis still stays behind. It's very clear pasuk in the Torah that says, "Ha'isha viladea tiel adonea." So he goes, but who yetzi begapo? The Eved Ivri leaves and leaves the children behind. Now, if we're talking about his biological children that he had before he sold himself as an Eved, they're not subject to the sale. So what does that mean that they get to go free? What do they have to do with this? So the Gemara says, what does it mean when the pasuk says his sons and daughters go free, or his children go out free? Banavu b'nosav minim karim, were they ever sold in the first place? Mikan, the Gemara learns from here, sherabo chayiv b'mizonos banav. Imagine this: the guy goes ahead, he has a family, he sells himself as an Eved Ivri. Now, as an Eved Ivri, everything he does is for his master. Who's going to support those kids? What's the halacha? The owner of this Eved Ivri has to actually provide sustenance and food to the children of his Eved Ivri, despite the fact that he has nothing to do with them. Now, when he goes free, he no longer has to provide that. Kiyosh b'davar, similarly, ata omer imbal ishahu v'yotza ishto imo. The pasuk says if he's married, then his wife also goes free. Amr Shimon imhu nimkar ishto mi nimkara. It's not a package deal. You don't get the husband and wife together. You bought the Eved Ivri. So the Eved Ivri comes, his wife stays home. Gemara says, Mikan, we learn from here, Sharabo chayiv b'mizonos ishto. The master actually has to provide food to the wife of his Eved Ivri. The tzricha, and we need to actually teach us this halacha both with regard to his wife and with regard to his children. Why? Diashmina and Banav, if the pasuk would teach us that he has to provide sustenance to the children of the Eved Ivri, mishum delo b'nei me'evad u'mechaninu. They can't get out and work. These are kids. What do you expect of children? To go out and earn enough money to support themselves, to be able to buy food? They can't do that. So I would say, they're the ones who need support of Ishto. The Bas Mechel Mevadi, she can go out and work. Many highly qualified women who are able to earn a parnasa for themselves, so let her go out and work. So Ema, I would say, Tav v'techa, let her go out and work and eat. And therefore, the pasuk teaches us, no, you actually have to provide food for her as well. V'yashbin and ishto, if we only taught us the halacha, that he has to provide food to the Eved Ivri's wife, we would say, hold on. That's only going to be relevant for the wife. Why? Delav darka dure. She can't earn any money. It's just not appropriate for her to go around from door to door asking people to give her food. Avabanav, if he has sons, didarkayu la dure. It's okay. Kids can go around from door to door asking for food. Eimolo, I would say he doesn't have to provide food for them. Tzricha, we need both. We need to actually teach you that the master is responsible to provide food for the sons and the daughters and the wife of his Eved Ivri. After all, you hired this guy to work for you. You took away his ability to be able to provide for his family, and therefore you as the master now have acquired that responsibility. Tan Rabbanan. The last word in Chaf Beis Amud Aleph, as we turn to the top of Chaf Beis Amud Beis, 22b, Ilu Nemar Azno Badelas. If the pasuk would have simply said, Azno Badelas, with referring to the piercing of his ear at the door, Hayisi Omer, I would say, Yidkar Keneged Azno Badelas. I would say, you just have to make a hole near his ear on the door. Badelas in Azno lo. You don't make a hole in the guy's ear, just in the door itself. The Gemara says, Ozon lo. You're not going to make a hole in his ear. Vaksiv, it says in the pasuk, V'ratza Adonav Azno b'martzeya. It says very clear, his master will pierce his ear with an awl. So you can't say that you would not make a hole in his ear. The pasuk is clear. Ella, rather the Gemara says, let's clarify. Hayisi Omer would have said, Yirtza ena la'ozen me'evrai. I would pierce his ear someplace else. V'yanichena aladelas v'yidkar keneged azno badelas. After I pierce his ear away from the door, Then I would bring his pierced ear to the door and make a hole in the door. Talmud Lomar, the pasuk says clear, as no ubadelas, you have to actually do it on his ear and at the door at the same time. Haketzad, how does this work? Doker v'holech, he pierces his ear and goes ad shemagia eitzel delas, until the instrument that he's using for the piercing hits the door. And therefore, delas shomeani beinakura. The Gemara says the pasuk says the word delas. Now I would say shomeani. I hear from there beinakura beinakura. It doesn't have to necessarily be affixed to a doorpost. Any delas, any door. Talmud Lomar mezuzah, the pasuk says mezuzah, which refers to the doorpost. Ma mezuzah ma'umad, just like the doorpost is going to be standing. Afdelas nami ma'umad, the door has to actually be standing. So he has to go to a door that's connected to a doorpost, put the Eved's ear near the door, use the instrument that we described yesterday, pierce his ear through his ear until he hits the door. Yochanan ben Zakkai would explain these psukim k'min chomer. Rashi explains that it was like a jewel that people would wear. Tosfos has another explanation, but ultimately it's a description of a very positive way of understanding these psukim. He would say, Manish Tana ozen mikol evarim shabaguf. Why is the ear any different than any other limb on the body? He answers and explains, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu says, Ozen Sheshama, the ear that heard Koli, my voice, Al Har Sinai, on Har Sinai, B'shash Amarti Ki Li B'nei Yisrael Avadim, the ear that heard me make this declaration, Kadosh Baruch Hu is talking and saying, for me, the B'nai Yisrael, the Jewish people, shall be avadim, servants, and we understand from there, v'lo avadim la'avadim, they should not be servants to servants. They're my servants. V'halach zeh, this guy went, v'kana adon li'atzmo, he went ahead and voluntarily sold himself as a servant to somebody else, and then he's extending this even further. Such a person, yirtza, he should have a piercing on that ear that heard at Har Sinai, that he should be a servant to me, to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and not a servant to other people. Shimon Rabbi Hayidarish, Shimon Rabbi would darshan as a mikra azek ben chomer. He would darshan this pasuk also, like chomer, like Rashi explained, like a jewel. Manish tana delos mezuzah. Why by the door? Can't find a better place to pierce the guy's ear. Why are we specifically using a door and a doorpost? Mikol kelen shuvabayis. Why is that better than any other place in the house? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. Kadosh Baruch Hu is telling us delas umezuzah, the doorpost. And the door, Shahayu Eidim b'Mitzrayim, it actually gave testimony in Egypt. B'shasha pasachti ala mashkov, as I passed over everyone's door, v'alshtei mezuzos, and the doorpost, v'yamarti, and I said, Ki li b'nei Yisrael avadim, I made this declaration that Klal Yisrael should be servants for me, v'lo avadim ala avadim, they should not be servants to other servants, v'hotzeisem me'avdus l'cheros, I went ahead and I removed them for servitude, and I gave them freedom, v'halach zeh, and this person went, v'kana adon liatzmai, yirtza b'fnei. So two things, the ear that heard me make this declaration, that Klal Yisrael should be servants to me and not servants to other people, and the doorpost that was actually the catalyst in me taking them out of Mitzrayim, away from servitude to freedom, those two things that were so deeply involved in Klal Yisrael becoming a free nation and then becoming meshubed, becoming responsible to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, this person went ahead and said, you know what, I want to get myself another master. I want to become subservient to somebody else. That ear and that doorpost is now going to be the catalyst in him staying past his term. That concludes the sugya of Eved Ivri. Now we're going to move on to Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish servant. The Mishnah writes, I should just point out, sometimes people get a little nervous from gematrias, like where do gematrias come from? So first of all, there are some gemaras that have gematrias, but here's a Tosfos that actually uses a gematria. So we'll quickly just learn it. Manish tana ozen. Why is an ear different? So Tosfos says, yesh b'medrash. The medrash writes, de martseya, the word martseya, which is in all, b'gematria dalid meos shana. It's 400, referencing the 400 years. Klal Yisrael was supposed to be servants for 400 years, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him out. HaKadosh Baruch Hu took him out. Then this guy went. He said, you know what? I actually want to become a servant to somebody else. Therefore, he's going to actually be pierced with the martzeya that has that gematria, that value. Again, the idea is that yes, we have to go to work. Yes, we have to go out there and we have to do the things that we have to do to support ourselves and our families. But to make yourself subservient to somebody else, that automatically takes away from our subservience to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We're supposed to only be subservient to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Listen, we have a boss. We have to make sure that our bosses are happy with us if we want to be employed. But ultimately, to be subservient to somebody else, become an eved, that's ultimately, that shows a lack of our service to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and therefore it's viewed as a very negative thing in the Torah. So Eved Kanani, Mishnah writes, Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish Eved, Nikna, can be acquired b'kesef, with monetary transaction, b'shtar, with a contractual transaction, u'b'chazaka, we'll explain what chazaka is later, but ultimately chazaka is any type of action that establishes the person as an Eved. V'kones atzmo, he can ultimately redeem himself with money through other people, which means he can't be the one to buy himself out. The reason for this is, the Gemara is going to explain this, is that an Eved Kanani does not have any possessions of his own. He is so subservient to his master that anytime he owns anything, he automatically transfers to the master. So how could he go ahead and redeem himself? The moment he acquires money, it automatically belongs to his master. So therefore, would have to be someone else who would buy him out. Or he can have a shtar, a contract that allows him to go free. He can facilitate that himself. Divi Rabbi Meir, these are the words of Rabbi Meir. Our sages teach us he indeed can use kesef by himself. He can have someone else facilitate the contract for him. However, we're going to have this problem of how is he going to own money? If the money comes from somebody else, he can actually facilitate the transaction to free himself from his master. The Gemara says, how do we know that an Eved Kanani can be acquired with money, with a contract, and with chazaka? The Gemara says, I know that everybody was sitting here this morning, was eagerly awaiting for some discussion about stei achuza again, so don't worry, I have some good news for you. Baruch Hashem, right here, the Gemara is going to bring it back in. The pasuk says, he will be inherited for your children after you, l'reshes, as inheritance, l'reshes achuza, for an ancestral inheritance. So Kiddushin Akasav, the pasuk actually juxtaposed a Eved Kanani l'stei achuza. It makes it similar to stei achuza. Ma stei achuza niknu v'kesef b'shtar b'chazaka. Just like if a person wants to buy a stei achuza, a field that was in someone's family for many years, he can do that with money, with a contract, or with chazaka. Af Eved Kanani, the same thing is true with an Eved Kanani. He can be purchased with kesef, with shtar, and chazaka. Okay, so there is a parallel between a stei achuza and an Eved Kanani. The Gemara says, hold on a second. If that's true, that we are drawing a parallel between an Eved Kanani and stei achuza, ima stei achuza, remember from yesterday, stei achuza is chozeres l'baylam b'yovel. It returns to its original owner at Yovel. So I should say, Af Eved Kanani, Chozer L'Bailam B'Yovel, he should be able to go back to his Bailam, so to himself. B'Yovel, Tamalomer, the pasuk teaches us, no, La'olam, he stays there, La'olam B'hem Tavodu, he must work for you forever, and therefore he does not go back to himself at Yovel. The Gemara says, Tana, we learned in a Brisa, Af B'Chalipin. Not only can an Eved Kanani be purchased with money, with a contract, and with chazaka, with an establishment of his service, af b'chalipin, even with a switch, with a trade. The Tana Didan, our Tana did not mention chalipin. Why? The Gemara says, Milsa delesa b'metaltalin katani. The ways to acquire something which are not relevant to movable objects are mentioned in our Mishnah. However, Milsa the Isa b'metaltalin, things, methods of acquisition that can be used for movable items, lo katani, that are not mentioned in our Mishnah. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, Eved Kanani, an Eved Kanani, a non-Jewish servant, nikne b'meshicha, can be acquired by pulling him. So how does that work? Ketzad. How does a person acquire a person by pulling him? Takfo. So he grabs onto him, uba etzlo, and he comes to him, kano, by pulling him, and he comes close to you, you have acquired him. Karo uba etzlo, if you call him and say, sir, would you mind to come over here? Well, lo kano, that is not a kinyan. You can't acquire somebody by just asking him to come over, and he comes over. The Gemara says, hold on. Bishlam ulatana didan, according to our Tana, milsa d'isa b'metatli lo katani, d'lesa b'metatli katani. We understand why our Mishnah only listed kesef, shtar, and chazaka. Money, a contract, and an establishment of work. Because he's only mentioning things that are not relevant to movable objects. Latana bra, to the Tana of the Brisa. Nisni Meshicha. If you mention Chalipin, why don't you just add in Meshicha? Bring everything down. You don't have any limitations on what you're going to mention. Where it says Kikatani, what did he mention? Milsa de Isa, Bain b'mikarkai, Bain b'mitaltali. The Brisa wanted to mention things that can be used both with real property and with movable objects. Meshicha to b'metatli isa. Meshicha, pulling, which is only relevant when it comes to movable objects. However, b'mekarkai lesa, it doesn't work with real property. You can't pull real property. So therefore, Lo Katani did not bother mentioning it. The Gemara says, Ketzad, takfu ba'etzlo. If he grabs him and he comes over kano, that's what we said before. How does Meshicha work? You grab onto him and he comes to you. Karu ba'etzlo, you call him over. Uba'etzlo, and he comes to you. Lo kano, you cannot acquire him by just calling him. Gemara says, is that true? Vikaru lo, is it true that if he calls him and he comes over, it's not a good kinyan, it's not a good acquisition? Tanya, we have a brisa which says, Ketzad b'mesira. So we're first mentioning Mesira. Mesira is different than Meshicha. We'll get to Meshicha in a minute. Mesira, we'll learn this later on when it comes to the purchase of animals. The transfer, the physical transfer of the animal from one person to the next is also a method of kinyan. How does that work? Achza betlafa, person grabs onto the hoof, besaira, to the hair of the animal, ba'ukif sholeh, the saddle that's on top of it, b'shlif sholeh, with the sack that's on top of the animal, b'prum b'yoshev with the bit that's in the mouth of the animal, u'bezug shebetzavara, or pulling onto the bell on the neck of the cow. Kana, that is a good way of acquiring it. Ketzad b'meshicha. So how does Meshicha work? And this is clear. The Brisa clearly asks, how does Meshicha of an animal work? If a person wants to acquire an animal, one of the methods of acquiring an animal is by pulling it. And the Mishnah asks very clearly, how do you acquire an animal with Meshicha? Korei la v'hiba. You call the animal, and the animal comes. Or you strike it with a stick, and it comes before you. The halach is kivon she'akro yad v'regel. Once the animal picks up the yad, the hand, the paw, v'regel, and the hind leg, kana, he now owns it. Rav Asi, v'amri lo Rav Acha Omar, Rav Asi, and some say it was Rav Acha, say that no, it's not enough just to pick up an arm and a leg. The animal has to walk the full length of its height. But what's the problem? Clearly it says the way that you can acquire an animal with Meshicha is by calling it over and it comes. The Gemara says a very fundamental difference. Amri behema, when we're dealing with an animal, regardless of how smart this animal might be, adaita demara azla. Animals don't have independence of thought. Animals don't think, I want to go here, I want to go there. The animal is completely subservient to its owner, and when it comes, it's really not doing anything on its own. It is simply just following orders. Eved, as much as a person might be an Eved, as much as a person might be subservient to somebody else, a human being can never lose their independence of mind. So therefore, when an Eved just moves because someone called him, that's simply he himself making this decision to go. Amar Rav Ashi, Rav Ashi says, Eved katan kibehemadami. An Eved katan, a child who does not yet have enough depth of mind or depth of intelligence, so therefore they just do whatever they're told. So therefore a person can indeed acquire an Eved kanani katan by calling him over. Tana Rabbanan. Ketzad the chazaka. How does chazaka work? So our Mishnah told us that one of the ways to acquire an Evet Kanani is through an establishment of work. What's an example? Hitir lo menalo. He unties his shoe. Oh, holach kelev achro lebeis hamerchatz. He carried his clothing behind him on the way to the bathhouse. Hifshito, he undressed him. Herchitzo, he washed him. Sacho, he anointed him. Gerdo, he scratched him or he massaged him. Hilbisho, he got him dressed. And Ilo, or he put his shoes on him. Higbio, or he picked him up. He lifted up his master. Any one of those things are all examples of work that the Eved is doing for the master. In such a case, once he does any of those things, Kano, now he has been acquired by his master. On Rabbi Shimon. Shimon makes this line. It's a little bit of an ambiguous line at this point. We'll get back to it. The Gemara is going to explain what it means. Lo tehei chazaka gedola mehagba. We can't have that chazaka is going to be a better or a more inclusive kinyan than hagba. Why? Shehagba kona b'chol makom. Lifting something up is always the best way to acquire something. So the Gemara says, Maika Amar, what is he saying? The Gemara says, Amar Rav Ashi, he's saying the following. Higbio hu l'rabo. If the Eved lifts up his master, kano. The master now owns him. Why? Because the servant did an act of service to him. Higbio rabo lo. The master picks up the Eved, lo kano. That's not a valid way of acquiring an Eved. Rabbi Shimon commented on that and said, that can't be. Why? Lo tehei chazaka gedola mehagba, because then it comes out that chazaka is a stronger kinyan than hagba. And that's not the way we understand this. Why shehagba kona b'chol makom? Our Masorah is that hagba is always a stronger kinyan than chazaka. So if the Eved lifting up the master should work, then certainly master lifting up the Eved should work. The Gemara says, Hashta di Amrit. Now that you said, Higbiu hula rabo kano, that if an Eved, if a servant lifts the master, that is a valid way of the master taking ownership of the Eved. Elamiat, if that's the case, Shivcha Kenanis, person wants to acquire a female non-Jewish servant, Tikna Bebiyah. One of the valid ways of acquiring her should be through bia, through an intimate action. Why? Because at the time of the bia, she is raising him up. Because under normal circumstances, she would be on the bottom, and therefore she would be lifting him up by virtue of the fact that they are being intimate together. Gemara says, no, you're missing the point. Ki kamrinan. When do we say that a kinyan of chazaka works? When the servant lifts the master. Zanen v'zemet stayr. That's only in a case where the master is benefiting, but the Eved is not. It's not very easy to lift a person. So therefore, if you say, lift me up and put me on my chair, or lift me up and put me on my bed, that's a lot of work. Under those circumstances, that's a valid way of acquiring an Eved, because that's work. However, by a case of intimacy, zenena v'zenena. They're both involved in the intimate act, and therefore they're both enjoying it. So the Gemara says, Zenenu Zenenahu. Okay, the Gemara says, that would be under normal circumstances. When they are having bia, like the way of normal people. Shelo kedarka ma'ikil meimar. What would happen if they are having bia in an abnormal way? In such a case, the Gemara assumes a bia shelo kedarka does not provide pleasure to her. So in such a case, she's not enjoying it. He is. Maybe under those circumstances, that would be considered an act of chazaka. Gemara says, Amar of Achai bar Ada, First of all, who told you that there's no benefit, there's no pleasure to both of them? Maybe they both do indeed enjoy an act of intimacy, even if it's shlo kedarka. The Ode, and additionally, Mishkvei Isha Ksiv, the Pasuk says Mishkvei Isha, which literally means the lying down of a woman. Ikishana Kasav, Kedarka l'shalo kedarka. Gemara basically, the pasuk basically equates all acts of intimacy, whether it is kedarka or it is shalo kedarka. Just to finish up with a quick story, Rabbi Yehuda Hanadua Gersh in lo Yoshim Havi. Yehuda Hanadua, who was from Kush, from a city in Africa, he was a ger, he was a convert, and he didn't have any relatives who were able to ultimately inherit his estate. Now what happened? Chalash, he got very sick. Al Mar Zutra l'shiyule bey. Mar Zutra went to go visit him to see how he was doing. And Chazi tetakav le'almatuva. He saw that he was very, very ill. Amar leila avde. He realized that any minute he's going to die, and nobody's going to be able to inherit all of his possessions. So he quickly thought, he has avadim, and if nobody's going to take possession over these avadim at the time that he dies, they're going to acquire themselves. So therefore, he was a quick thinker. The Mar Zutra quickly just went ahead. He told the servant of Rabbi Yehuda, Hanadua, Shloif limisani, Amtinu lebesa. Can you just take my shoes off and bring it to my house and walk it to my house? Now, why did he do that? Because he wanted that at the time that Rabbi Yehuda Hanadua dies, this servant will be working for him. So there'll be an immediate transfer from Rabbi Yehuda to him, and he'll be able to acquire that servant immediately. Ikud Amri Gadol Have. Some say the servant was a Gadol. He was above the age of Bar Mitzvah, and then therefore Zeh Pirish L'Mitzvah, Zeh Pirish L'Chayim. Yehuda died, and ultimately he took possession over his servants. Some say that the servant was a katan, udeloka Abashal. This story is not going according to Abashal. Who's Abashal? The Tanya, for it says in the Brisa, Ger Shemes. If a convert dies, ubizbizu Yisrael nachasav. They gave out they gave out his possessions because he had nobody to inherit him. He had servants, whether they were adult children, adult servants, or child servants, kanu atzman. They ultimately take possession of themselves. And therefore they are bnei chorin. Abashal says, gedolim kanu atzman. The gedolim take possession of themselves, and therefore they're kanu atzman bnei chorin. They are free to go ketanim even afterwards. They don't have the ability to acquire themselves. Call machzik behen, zach behen. Anybody who ultimately takes possession of them gets them even afterwards. So depending on whether this servant was a gadol or a katan, would be whether we're following Abashal or not. Have a wonderful day. It was a covet to learn with you the past couple of days. I believe Rabbi Silver will be back tomorrow morning. Enjoy your day.